Hello, Jerod.
Chickasaw, how you doing, Mark? It's good to see you, Maestro.
It's great to see you. So I am Mark Shapiro, artistic director and conductor of the chamber chorus Cantori, New York. And my guest is Jerod Tate, and he has agreed to introduce himself with his full name. So Jerod, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Hachin Chickasaw, Sahol Shifoa, Jerod Taloa Impichchaachaaha Tate, Chickasaw Impichchaachaaha Chokat Michashawi Iksa, Ishtalon Shalolili, Taloa Ikbili, Hashlaka Sayopa, Chickamashki, Yakoke. Hi, everyone. My name is Jerod Impichchaachaaha Tate. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation here in Oklahoma, and I'm a professional classical composer.
Excellent. It's such a beautiful language. So Cantori, New York is going to give a premiere. It's an interesting project that we devised in conversation with Jerod. So this is a piece of Jerod's that existed before. And Jerod will invite you to tell us sort of the before and after. But it's a piece that existed before and that we invited Jerod to expand into a new and larger version. We won't say better, but new and larger. That Cantori will give the premiere of in two concerts in New York City on November 4th and 5th. November 4th at 8 p.m., November 5th at 3 p.m. And this will be at Church of the Holy Apostles in Manhattan. Also on the program is music by Carolyn Shaw and by John Ramerheim. And there is a theme of Joy Harjo, the poet, and we'll invite Jerod also to talk about Joy, whom I know you know. So I'm going to just hand that over to you, Jerod, and tell us first maybe a bit about, I think we'll ask you more about your general background as a composer a bit later, but let's go first into this specific project. So Found Again.
Yes.
Tell us how this piece came to be and then how the revision came to be and what the difference is.
Absolutely. Well, this was originally commissioned in 2015, I believe, by Words and Music, a vocal quartet. So it was originally composed for a vocal quartet and piano with an optional children's chorus. They had a high school that wanted to be involved, and so they had performed it in two different versions like that. And so I had chosen poetry by Joy Harjo. Joy is an old friend of mine, and I'm very, very fortunate. I've composed to her works before, and in fact, I've got another work coming up this next year to her newer poetry. And Joy is the third time poet laureate for the United States of America, and I mean, which is totally, I mean, it makes total sense that she would get that. Her poetry is absolutely fantastic, and it's really easy for me to compose to. It's very emotionally evocative, and her ethos of her experience as a Muskogee Creek American Indian person, to me, resonates very, very deeply with me. And so I love Joy herself. She's an amazing person, and her poetry to me is just absolutely, it's so rich and just spiritually just so deep, and I just love it. So I have a really easy time writing to her poetry, and I'm just really, really glad to be able to do that. So in our circumstance, I mean, you obviously we talked on the phone, and I'm very, very blessed that you called. I'm very grateful for this, to have this opportunity to reorchestrate it for percussion. So we have three percussionists, one that's on marimba, one on vibraphone, and one on other multiple percussion. And chorus, and a children's chorus. And then also through your coaching, I included the children's chorus throughout the entire work. And then we also added some Chickasaw to the work as well. So this is a very substantially expanded piece of work as far as I'm concerned. And so you've actually really inspired me to wonder about a full orchestration now. I'm just like, it's kind of growing in my mind, and I've thought about that as well. So maybe this will take on another iteration in the future. Wow. But I am just so pleased to be able to reorchestrate. And, you know, this is something historically that composers have done that I find to be a real joy, is to take your work and rework it for a different ensemble. I mean, Bach did it all the time. Stravinsky, and there's multiple composers who have done this. And so what a beautiful challenge for me to be able to do that. And you know, it's interesting because I wrote it for piano, but that doesn't necessarily mean it translates to percussion like really easily, even though they are keyboard style instruments. That's tough. And so there's some passages that really fly. And so I'm making them practice like they're back in college again, for sure. So I'm really grateful to have that opportunity to reevaluate my music. And I ended up making some permanent edits to the work itself. And all that whole process to me has been really, really enlightening for myself as a composer, and I'm just really grateful. And now I get to narrate the poetry, which I'm very grateful for as well. It would have been nice to have Joy, and fortunately, and the good and bad news is that she's so famous now that she's totally completely booked. I mean, it's really hard to be able to get her to do anything. When we premiered it, we were fortunate enough to just be able to, she's like, yeah, I can make it for this certain performance, and it was a little more casual in that sense. But she's now just really, really so famous now that it's very difficult. But I mean, I'd rather be in that circumstance for her for sure, because I think she's legendary, and I'm really, really glad that she is now a permanent mark in American history the way that she is.
She absolutely is, and it seems like musically you're catching up anyway. So yeah,
trying.
Yes, we don't, as musicians, we don't get the same platform, I suppose. But
well, that's true. I'll tell you. I mean, being programmed next to these monumental composers that I'm just absolutely. I feel eclipsed, and I feel very grateful to be in the presence of our other composers on a concert. And so that's feeling pretty darn grateful these days.
Definitely not eclipsed. Let's say many stars in the firmament. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Yeah, I think the rewriting is an interesting thing, and I think there's so much awareness in our discourse about not wasting, and I think and about not sort of one-time use, and I think there is an interesting dynamic in a lot of classical music where people want to give a premiere, and then it's rare that something is revived, or it's revived the same way. And there was something about this idea of taking something that existed and repurposing it that I think appealed to both of us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have to tell the audience that I give a lot of credit to you, because I did it, and then you called and gave me some very, very beautifully candid feedback on the involvement of the chorus, the children's chorus. And I mean, it was at the perfect time, because everything that you said made sense, and I heard it immediately, and I was able to make those adjustments really organically and very, very quickly. I love experiences like that. I really love it when my colleagues give me feedback that is very impactful on me as a musician, and I have an immediate response like that. That's happened to me in the past. And I'm just so pleased that we did that, and that you talked to me, and that you were very forthright with me about your thoughts about it, because it really changed the piece. And I really believe it's absolutely for the better. I think it's a stronger work now.
Thank you. I thank you for being receptive to that. And it's wonderful to work with composers who are. And I think we have made it a project now where I think for the children's chorus, it will have a lot of meaning for them as they're involved. And then what they bring to the piece as a whole is also very strong.
Yes.
There's a real independent identity for them musically and kind of dramaturgically that is really fantastic. So
I totally agree. And dramaturgically is a really good word for that. Basically, you helped me with the dramaturgy of it, and that was really, really impactful. And I believe that the balance is there. I really do. I think it's just the right balance. I feel really good about it. So I'm very grateful for your input on that.
My pleasure. Thank you. So Jerod, tell us a bit. As we said, we've learned from experience these interviews should be shortish. But tell us a bit about your musical background overall and how you came to be who you are today.
Absolutely. I appreciate that opportunity. Well, it all starts with two very important people in my life, and that is my parents. So my father, Charles, is Chickasaw Indian from Oklahoma. He's born and raised in Ardmore. And Dad graduated University of Oklahoma Law School and became a tribal attorney, judge, special district judge. And so through my father, I had a really, really unusual and beautiful education in American Indian law and politics abroad, around North America, including with the Chickasaw Nation. And so that was really impactful to my life. But also, Dad is an incredibly trained classical pianist and baritone. So I grew up with my Chickasaw father playing repertoire in the house. In fact, love this story. He played accordion and gigged accordion. And so here's my Chickasaw father singing Italian music on accordion in restaurants in Ardmore, Oklahoma. That can only happen in America. I think that's really a cool story. But so because of my father, I was exposed to an enormous amount of Indian politics and law and culture with all kinds of different tribes. So that just set a beautiful background for my native experience. My mother, Patricia, was Manx Irish from Nebraska. And so I am Manx and Chickasaw. And my mother was a professional choreographer and dancer. And so between my two parents, I grew up saturated in American theater, dance, musical theater, and opera. And so along with that was all the music that goes with that. So for instance, my mother choreographed a Firebird, Petrushka, Rite of Spring, Romeo and Juliet, Nutcracker. She choreographed Slavonic dances. The Dvorak Opus 46. She staged and choreographed Soldier's Tale. I saw that when I was in 1983, and that was an incredibly rare experience. So I was exposed to some very, very important works that also had some of the finest orchestrations ever created. So just and of course, then I took up the piano because of my father. And, you know, of course, playing piano repertoire, it honestly is composition lessons, just straight up. That's how you learn to compose, is by playing instruments with great repertoire like that. So, I mean, my big heroes as a kid were choreographers like Isadora Duncan and Martha Graham, Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn and Agnes DeMille. And then later on, you know, Jerome Robbins, Alvin Ailey, Merce Cunningham, Bob Fosse. I mean, these people were very impactful to me in a theatric sense. So between all of my beautiful exposure to all of Indian country and all of this incredible exposure in all of the classical fine arts, I really had a lot of ingredients working for me. But I majored in piano at Northwestern, and it wasn't until I graduated Northwestern that my mom came to me and said, I want to do a new ballet that's based on American Indian stories from the Northern Plains and Rockies. She was teaching at the University of Wyoming and taught there for 30 years and wanted to do something relative to that area. So she assembled this with a lot of help from her native colleagues up in the Wyoming area, and then just turned to me and said, well, you're my Chickasaw classical pianist, and so you can write the score. I was 23 and I was just about to enter the Cleveland Institute of Music in piano performance. And this really, it completely transformed my life in a very beautiful and innocent way. My mother was asking me to be all of who I am at the exact same time. So I was able to combine my identity as a Chickasaw person and a classically trained musician all at once. So I went back to CIM and I started studying with Don Erb and added composition to my degree. And I announced to my family that I was to be a Chickasaw classical composer, very inspired by the composers before me who were very ethnically identified. You have all the Russian composers. Debussy is French, you know, Toru Takemitsu is Japanese. I mean, you couldn't have more Japanese orchestrations than Toru Takemitsu. But Bela Bartok, of course, was absolutely the first ethnomusicologist of his own people. And so, you know, he went out, and his model of transcribing music from his own culture and integrating that and finding his own ethos was very, very critical to me and very impactful. And so, but of course, I mean, I had folks like George Crumb, you know, in my wheelhouse, and, you know, Charles Ives, and, you know, I mean, just people like that, who American composers who, I mean, of course, that palette is enormous. The American experience is so vast. And, you know, Leonard Bernstein, of course, I mean, just stuff like that was really, all of that was resonating to me. But what's really important is that I felt a very positive pressure from all these examples of all these great composers, that if I was to do this, I would take it very seriously and in a very focused fashion. So the bar is very high. And if I'm going to be able to live up to the poetry of Joy Harjo, I needed to make sure that the composition that I was doing was at the same level as my other native colleagues in the other genres of fine art.
That's so fascinating and so beautifully put. It seemed to me when we spoke on the phone and what you've just said, you have a really omnivorous ear and imagination. And were you always like that?
I think so, you know, but again, it's like, I mean, it was just laid before me, honestly. It's like, I mean, so to me, that was my normal, was that type of variety of experience, you know, within both cultures that I grew up in. And so, I mean, I love traveling Indian country and meeting all of my native cousins from other tribes and sharing and working with them. I've worked with many other tribes on their languages and music as well. And I really, really enjoy that. And to me, it's really important to be able to pay homage to my native cousins around the continent and to spread that energy and that joy. But that's something that's also very inherent to Indian country as well. We love meeting each other and shaking hands and introducing each other, ourselves in our language, and sharing stories and laughing and this kind of thing, and asking about families. That's very, very common in Indian country, but it's also common in the fine arts. every single time you meet people in the fine arts, it's all suddenly it's fine art shop talk. It's the same thing, and it's all culturally based, and it's all exploratory, and it's all with lots of joy, honestly. And I just love that. So I have this experience of joy and exploration from both cultures in my life, and it's really quite exciting to be able to live in that world.
Yeah, it's fantastic. One last question. You mentioned both that you'll be coming to narrate, which is wonderful. And
Yes.
I want to be sure people know that, and that they hear this voice of yours over Zoom, and they just think, wow, but is that going to be live? And you'll be narrating in English, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the chorus will be doing some singing in Muskogee,
Yes.
Chickasaw, and Chickasaw, right?
That's correct. Yes. Muskogee and Chickasaw. Yes.
Yeah. And I wondered, obviously we're asking ourselves, well, when we sing in French, it's not perfect. We do our best. When we sing in German, same story. And when we sing in those languages, I'm expecting we will have an accent. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's perfectly fine. And your accent isn't going to be as bad as you think it might be. But, I mean, you think about this, it's like all people who speak within language groups have different pronunciations. And so, okay, for instance, I'm an adult learner of the Chickasaw language, and I teach my son. So he speaks more than I did when I was a kid, but I take our online classes. I mean, we have Chickasaw for our citizens online. And we talk about this all of the time about different speakers and how they pronounce different words. And so already within all languages, we have variations and dialects of the same language. It's all over the place. And so you could have one professional French singer singing Debussy art song and another one, and they're going to have different pronunciations of their own language. And German, actually, you see that a lot in German. I notice it in German. And so that's already a natural human thing. But also, it doesn't really bother me. All languages naturally smooth out anyway when we sing it. All of them do. And they smooth out in just different ways depending on the chorus or the soloist. And so to me, it's just kind of par for the course on a human level. So I think it's perfectly fine.
Great. All right. Well, as I said, we have committed to not going on and on, although I think we could, because you certainly have such an interesting mind and such a lot to say. So
thank you.
I'll leave it there. I'm just stopped the recording. So thank you so much, and be right back.